So welcome to another war game review from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we played No Retreat, the French and Polish fronts from GMT Games. This game and also the series game designed by Carl Paradis. And as you can imagine, French-Polish front, two different fronts, right? One's on the east, one's on the west. So it's actually two games in one box. It uses the same set of rules, with a few different exceptions for each front.
The map is, so the other side is the French front.
Yeah, so it's not one where you kind of set up both and play them both at the same time. There's two separate games. So
Ooh, that would have been kind of cool, wouldn't it? At a different time, though.
Yeah.
A year apart. Not a year, but...
Yeah. But it's the whole of, like, each campaign, basically. So the map is smaller than the rest of the maps in this series. Mm-hmm. At least, we've played No Retreat, the Russian front, just the normal one. And that one had, like, a big full map. This is literally half the size, but it's you get the same amount of map, it's just two different games. So,
yeah,
you have the whole of Poland on here. This is the Polish front we got set up. You have, like, a sliver of the Soviet Union on the east. On the west, you've got just, like, the edges of Germany, Slovakia, Bohemia. And then there's, like, some bits of East Prussia and Lithuania here as well. And it's quite literally, it's 1939. You play, basically, all of September. And it's the Germans blitzkrieg Poland. That's the whole of this scenario. The reverse is the invasion of the Battle of France. You just swing through Belgium.
Take Paris.
Come through the Ardennes and just, that's it. It's drive to Paris. That's what that is. So you get two games in one. This series of games, it's really cool because it's a hex encounter war game, but it's not, it's some of the old ones, tiny hexes, tiny little counters. This
minimal counters.
Yeah, the counter density is low, so it's very approachable, and I think it moves along at a fast clip for that reason. The maps, is it Simonich? Does he make the maps? I don't know if that's true.
Charles Kibler.
Okay. The maps are really clean and very clear, and that's something I really like in these. You're never confused about what the terrain is, and all the different terrains are very.
Well, the only thing that I think confused us a little bit was the rivers, but we figured it out.
Yeah,
the rivers were hard to differentiate in some ways.
Yeah, there's a couple different colors.
We figured
and
it
sizes,
out.
But
we figured it out.
It's
a great map.
This is a forest. This is a swamp.
Very clear.
Everything else is clear.
This is a fortification.
It's very, very clear.
Yeah.
There's nothing tiny and small.
No.
And that's super nuanced, which is nice. Just a bold map.
Well, and that's probably more a product of it's really just a geographically small. What is this? A couple 100 miles by? I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, I would hate. I want to guess.
I mean, it's not huge, right?
But like the Russian map is the same thing, right? Even though it's huge geographically, it's just like here's the really clear terrain features.
Right.
Like I'm not like lost on the map or anything. Yeah. And I really like how clean this game is. The counters they're larger than your normal kind of GMT counters, and they come they're pre-cut.
Pre-rounded,
which is nice, and they're really thick cardboard, and the printing on them is really big and bold.
And there's not a lot of information on them.
But I'm not like sat there squinting at numbers and different symbols. The numbers are very like I'm sat across the table, I can read
still see them,
which is really nice.
Yeah.
A lot of games you go like, what am I seeing? So this game is how I remembered No Retreat was.
And we played that about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
For the first time.
It was a while. And I remember being like, that was such a cool game. It was really playable. And in my brain, it was kind of like almost a light to medium hex encounter game.
Yeah. Not overly complex.
Yeah, not overly complex, but had some like cool tactics to it. And then we played this, and I was like, I don't remember it being this complicated.
A little more complex.
And they added some bits and pieces, which adds some more time to the game. There's a couple extra steps here and there. The big things they added are these initiative markers, and there's basically each faction has these
20 of them.
a bunch of little discs, and it's a chit draw. You draw a certain number of them, and they can enhance what you do. Some of them can be, combat modifiers.
Add a shift.
Germans have like a blitzkrieg option with them, or they can be spent as a currency to activate events on the cards. This isn't a card-driven game, but there is a hand of cards that you can use to accentuate what you're doing or to do extra things.
And that part is very different than the event cards in the Russian front. You didn't have to spend anything to get those event cards.
Yeah, and you don't have to spend to activate all of these.
Just some.
But some of the more kind of powerful events.
Yeah.
You have to spend some of your initiative markers to activate those. So there's a little bit of extra...
A trade-off.
Kind of a little...
Yep.
But there's that extra economy of things that you're trying to do, as well as the kind of the normal game, where it's moving the counters around, battling, CRT, combat odds, all that kind of good stuff. In this particular one, we played Poland. It's Poland, right? It's almost a foregone conclusion of what's going to happen. Right. But I also didn't feel like the game was so utterly one-sided.
No.
And they've done a really interesting job of where they put the victory points. And what I mean by that is there is a victory point track, and there are certain sudden death conditions.
Thresholds,
so, if the Germans get like 6 victory points by the end of, or by the beginning of turn 4, they immediately win.
Which was how this game ended.
Yeah. They're like, it's not even worth, like, that they've taken historically more ground, they've done enough damage to Polish defenses, enough kind of troops have surrendered or cities have fallen where they've done better, so they win.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. I think at the end of turn 7, if they didn't meet that, there's some other things that happen, like their leader gets flipped over. Leaders are a different thing. But in turn 7, they need 13 victory points.
Right.
So there's this kind of, the longer it goes on, the more kind of the Fuhrer needs you to have kind of taken ground. So the Germans are on this race against the clock, basically, because once you get to end game scoring, it's kind of just like, okay, how well did you do?
Yeah.
But the Germans are really trying to end it and meet those sudden death conditions. So that has a very interesting feel where, you could just leisurely go in and wipe everything, but you kind of have to go for it. And it forces you to really use the new Blitzkrieg rules and to do it, to act like the Germans did. Throw those tanks forward, punch through the lines, cut off all the supply, and then just like head on to Warsaw. I mean, it was fascinating how that played out in the game.
Well, and what I would say about the Blitzkrieg, and we've talked about this a lot through all the war games we've played, tanks necessarily are not the most powerful units on the battlefield. They have certain advantages, but if you look at most of the tank units, they're 2s and 4s. A lot of the infantry are...
You got some 5, 6.
5, 6. I think I had a 6 was the highest, but they have the advantage of speed. They can move a lot of hexes. They also have armor column shifts. So this game really is about, and I like this element of it, it's about figuring out how to use those tanks to your advantage. It felt like many other East Front games that we've played. You got to figure out where those holes can be punched, and then expand those holes, and then drive your big infantry units through to kind of mop it up.
Yeah, making pockets.
Yep, trying to cut units off.
Surrender if they've got no supply.
Like up near Danzig. I'm trying to think what the name of this city is. I'm not going to say it.
Not going to try and butcher that other name.
Gdynia, I think it is. But, I was trying to cut you off there in that kind of northwest quadrant. And I think I was 1 or 2 moves away from doing it. If I'd have had one more battle here that went well, I might have been able to cut those units off before having to... I think in the end I went in there and tried to wipe them out. But I like that. I like that maneuvering. I like that concept of having to think strategically about getting units out of supply. And you have to worry about that too.
Yes.
Germany, the supply isn't really a problem.
Unless the tanks get too far ahead. But in a map this small, you'd have to...
That's going to be hard.
It could happen, but you probably have to have misplayed your advance pretty badly.
Well, and the other thing I like about this game, but I didn't like about it, it's many games that you play the first time, you have to figure out how to play them. I didn't place my tanks right because I kind of misunderstood the rule a little bit. And that's something that I think next time I would have done that very differently, and the outcome would have been, I think, a little bit different.
It would have been even more powerful.
Yeah, which is crazy to me because I didn't roll that well.
No.
I think I rolled pretty badly.
Pretty interesting in this
we
one.
actually had really poor rolling, but I like that element. I loved that in No Retreat, the Russian front too. Trying to figure out how to get to certain areas, cut off supply. It felt very similar, and that's not surprising. It's the same system.
Yeah. One thing I really liked about this one is there are more than one combat results tables.
Yes.
There's a whole play aid, and I think it has 5 different CRTs on it.
Yeah.
There's a German mobile combat one, which is for, as you can imagine, like tanks and mech infantry. They roll on this kind of a better CRT.
And that's an interesting one too, because it doesn't have to be all just tanks.
Yeah, just
it can be
mostly
a couple of tanks, I think, with one infantry unit,
infantry, yeah.
which the Allies cannot do.
No.
And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, the Allies have a mobile combat table, but it has to be every unit's mobile. And that's, in this game, frankly, it's just when you have your cavalry charge.
And that's a historic thing,
yeah.
Where they're, that doctrine, that Blitzkrieg doctrine, or proper use of tanks, wasn't in the repertoire of the Allies yet.
Yeah.
The Germans were, but yeah, the cavalry. You mentioned cavalry. We'll talk about that. Yeah. It's always humorous.
Then there's a CRT for basically everything else, and then there's a separate CRT for assaulting fortresses, which is like, good luck.
Yeah.
Well, fortresses can hold out pretty well, so in this one you just want to surround them and basically move on. But when it comes to
They're
actually
tough.
taking Warsaw, it does require a lot of force. Even though the supplies are down, you kind of surround the city. That's how you're going to do that. And then there's a whole other separate one for when you actually perform a blitzkrieg action. Normally you do a full combat round. Then the Germans have option to play these blitzkrieg tokens where they can go again.
Right.
With just the panzers basically. And they roll on this is an incredibly favorable blitzkrieg assault table, which is
basically anything above a 3 is good on almost everything.
Because you'll have decent odds if you're doing those attacks usually, and you get some pretty significant
It's usually
results.
2 or 3 to 1 at least. I had a couple blitzkriegs that were 6 to 1, but those are very favorable.
But yeah, this is cool because if
Did you just bend my player aid?
No. But if you chose, you get to choose which one you roll on if there is a choice. Like, you might have all mobile units, but you might choose to roll on the prepared combat table for some reason.
I don't know why, but
like having different CRTs for different situations
is neat.
I always like it when they can do that without overcomplicating the game. And these are very simple situations. It's easy to know. This is what I'm rolling on.
I did find this slowed us down just a little bit because the results are different across them. Certain ones bring up more often the counter blow.
Yeah.
What was the other one? Counter. I'm trying to CR.
So there's required counter attacks, counter attacks, counter blows.
So when we were using the prepared combat table, those attacks went on and on and on. There wasn't a definite end. A lot of times it had to go on multiple rounds.
And
that's okay.
That's a defining feature of this game.
Yeah.
You do all your moves. Then you have these tokens. You only have a set number of attacks that you can do. You can't attack with everything.
The Germans have 5, and the Allies have 3.
Yeah.
So you can't attack every unit. You have to pick your attacks and then follow those up with blitzkrieg tokens.
Yes.
But I do like that economy of trying to figure out, I've only got 5 attacks. I got to do the most damage I can.
But then the reverse side of those attack tokens you're putting out have this counter blow symbol on them. And basically, that's used to force someone to attack a different place. So if someone's got a big, strong attack they're going, I can say, I'm going to put a counter blow over here. You have to split off some of your forces to attack this guy.
Yeah.
So this might not go well for me, but it might save these units over there from utter devastation.
Yeah.
So there's some really interesting decisions about when to use those, because when you use those, that basically puts that out, and that's also an attack token as well.
Yeah.
So there's some economy there to be had.
Well, and that mechanic I think is should mainly be taken advantage of by the defenders.
Yeah.
It can be used by both sides, but the attackers want to move quickly. They want to attack. The defenders kind of want to be picky and choosy about what they do and try to siphon off forces to force the spear to go in a different direction. And I like that.
But then a significant amount of the combat results force those kind of things to happen. It says, boom, you immediately do a counterattack.
Right.
Or boom, you do a counter blow, and you immediately have to put out that counter so that then that one's going to get resolved next turn.
Yep.
So, you might say, I'm doing a battle here, and it might cause 2 more battles.
Yes.
In the long run, at least. It's very interesting how that plays out.
Yeah.
And can cause some engagements to go a bit longer than you'd like.
Yeah.
And those die rolls then become kind of precarious because you might be forced to counterattack
with
terrible
odds.
But
I did more. I think we did more attacks with 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 odds than I've ever seen us do in other war games. You just don't do those attacks.
No.
Unless you're desperate or unless you have some event or something that's going to make that. Like you had that cool event, any attack, I'm going to lose a Panzer step.
That was dope.
That was a really great event. Which at a 1 to 2 odds or 1 to 3 odds, you'd be like, I'll risk it.
Yeah.
But definitely I think that system I'd like to learn more. You made a good comment while we were playing. I don't know. I said, I don't know that I've figured out the counter blows well enough. And you said, I don't know that I figured out how to use them well enough.
Mechanically, I understand what they do.
Fairly simple.
But strategically, how to take the fullest advantage of those.
Yeah.
I know that there's just I'm just waiting for the penny to drop and be like,
oh, that's how you do that.
Golly.
Yeah. And I think some of it is clear and pretty obvious, but to me, I want to find the ones that aren't as obvious.
Yeah. I want to see why they're distributed on the CRTs the way that they are.
Right.
I think that's very interesting. Some of the results that come up is like, I got decent odds. You roll it down, you're like, yikes.
Yeah.
They're attacking me back.
Exactly.
I thought I was in a good spot. And things can get out of hand pretty quick.
And some of those results are optional, meaning you don't have to counterattack. You can decline it.
But some of them are required.
Mandatory.
Yeah.
And so I liked that difference as well. To me, it felt more punishing when I was forced to do it no matter what. Didn't feel as punishing when I'm like, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
It's a waste.
But from a standpoint of Poland and this Polish front, that's a front that is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
Just from a historical standpoint, I mean, it was just terrible odds that the Polish were up against.
Well, we said it when we were playing the game. Cavalry versus armor is never a good thing.
And there was...
It's just not a good thing.
It's a very interesting tactical situation because it's an inevitable collapse that's going to happen.
Yeah.
The Polish in this are just trying to do better than historically.
All you're trying to do is slow them down, slow the Germans down, and make it harder. That's the reality.
And most of the time, like I played as the Polish, I didn't feel there was enough to do, but I feel like as the game was going on, I was like, I'm not even going to bother counterattacking because I can't risk.
Yeah, I'm trying to think in round
and we got
4. You actually decided I'm not going to attack.
Yeah,
it was just because you had no option.
I needed to keep my guys back, defend in the good terrain, doing counterattacks. At least in the situation we were in, there was nothing favorable for me to pick off anymore.
No. Yeah, I got my stacks to the point where they were pretty powerful. And the other thing I really liked about this game, there were 3 colored numbers that meant different things. The red was your mobile units. The yellow was your weak attack.
Yeah.
So if they attack the cavalry, they actually reduced by 1 their attack value. So cavalry's attack value is a 2.
2s.
So they're on an attacking, they're going to be a 1.
Yeah, but on a defending, they keep
they're
that
2. And then there were the white numbers that meant they could never attack. They can defend, they could never attack.
Although there is a single situation where they can attack.
What was that? I don't remember that coming up.
I think it's in a counter. It's in one of
one of the events.
Required counterattacks.
Oh, okay, got it. They can attack at that point.
I think it was that, or one of the counter blows,
Right.
something like that. It never came up, but it was like, I was like, oh, they can do something. And they were very explicit about that.
Got it. The other thing this game added was leaders, and I don't know how I felt about the leaders. The leaders, you started with one, and then you had the option of changing based on certain rounds.
It wasn't really an option. It would just happen.
It would just happen. There was no option.
If you didn't meet your sudden death criteria,
then you had to change.
It would flip over to the other side.
Basically, Hitler said, you didn't do it fast enough. We're going to change the leader for the Germans, right? So that was interesting. Those leaders had an ability or a handicap, and then they also had a hand limit for your action cards, as well as an initiative marker limit.
Yes.
And they were different. So I thought that was interesting. Don't know that it added a lot of complexity to the game, but was something that was interesting. And we looked at Hitler for the 1940, and that was pretty interesting.
He can come in. He's the replacement leader. It's just like Hitler comes in and takes over if the France campaign doesn't go well. And he's got some fascinating stuff on his card where it's like at the end of the strategic discard phase, you just
get rid of all your cards.
You discard all your cards at the end of the discard.
Which is bad. Which is bad.
It just says Hitler is inflexible.
Yeah. And really what that thematically represents is he doesn't want you taking any initiative and doing anything that he's not telling you. Yeah. So he's taking away all those abilities to do counterattacks or special moves. He's like, you're going to do what I'm going to say.
Stop namby-pamby around and
do
go
it.
For it.
So that was interesting. Those leaders were kind of cool. Anyway.
Yeah, those were a nice little addition without being overly complex. The initiative markers, there's a few extra counters to learn on top of anything you might know from the system, so that was a little bit of like, okay, and they add a few extra steps in combat because you can commit them to combat to get bonuses, so there's this extra commitment step, and some cards play off that, so there's a few more extra things, just a reference of timing and things like that.
Yeah.
So there's just an extra little layer in there with the leaders and all the things from those initiative markers that they kind of added. But what we'll do is I'll show you the board really quickly. There's kind of a lot. I think this is like a 6 rating complexity.
It is,
so there's a little bit to it. So I'm just going to show you just a few basics, and then we'll wrap up with a few final thoughts. So here's a look at the board, and this is how our game ended. And like I kind of mentioned, it ended pretty early for us. The Germans, they won at their first sudden death victory check, which was at the beginning of turn 4, so didn't go well for the Polish in this instance. And you can see, it's not that the whole of Poland collapsed or anything like that. It's just that the German progress had been better than historical, at least only slightly. And that's to do with taking minor and major cities, which score map victory points. I think they'd scored an event victory point from having some units surrender as well. So, bad time for the Polish in this one. But you can kind of see, it's just a big old long line of German army units. And there's a lot of these, if you kind of see these little red numbered for their movement, a lot of panzer units. Those are mobile units, they can move much further than the typical units. The Polish units, you can kind of see, they're these white ones, but they have these, I'll show you here, these tiny little round counters, and these are actually cavalry, and by that I mean men on horses with swords and guns. They're cavalry counters. They're free stacking, so you have like a stack with your regular infantry, and they have a cavalry unit with them. Now, just a fascinating piece of history that we ended up with, Panzer 1s, Panzer 2s, Panzer 38s rolling across Poland, and they were being charged with literal horses. A fascinating conflict. That's kind of the situation that we ended up with. How it plays out on the board is this little. So again, the red 5, that's the movement value. The red denotes that it's mobile. The yellow combat value, which says 2. The 2 is their combat value. When they defend at full 2. When they attack at 1 less than that. That's what that yellow means. It's a weak attack value. And it's just simply because they were historically combat ineffective, as you can well imagine. So you get a lot of little nuance in the game, because they can be decent defensive units because they free stack, so it's basically an extra free two free points for combat points. So you can get a couple good defensive units, toss a cavalry on there, and that's going to be pretty tough for the Germans to kind of dislodge from somewhere. But when you end up with just a cavalry unit, you're never going to lead a successful attack or charge. And where that's really important is that sometimes you don't have a choice about it. When you get attacked by someone, we'll look at the CRT here. There's a ton of different CRTs that we kind of showed you that. But if you end up with this CR result, that means a counterattack required. It means you will be forced to counterattack. So, for example, if the Third Army, a First Corps, if he attacks this guy and ended up with a CR result, the cavalry unit has to attack back. That's the combat result. They have to attack back, and in doing so, they're attacking with a 1. So then you end up with a 1 to 5 combat odds, which is terrible. And you're just basically like smashing yourself like water against a wall. But again, a great representation of history, and it's just fascinating to see that come from the CRT into the actual board game itself. As you can see, we'll just show you that one more time. CRT combat is odds based. So a couple of panzers here. Those combat values are in black. You have a 3 and a 4, so if they stack together, they have a 7 value. And you might attack, for example, this stack, which has, again, defensively 2, and then this guy has a 3. So you're looking at 7 on 5. You're going to roll on the 1-to-1 table. If there's defensive terrain, you might get a column shift. So you might end up doing some pretty gnarly attacks. And that was something that this game gives you. That is defensive terrain, and you can hold out in it. But you can't just sit here and occupy the cities and forests, because there is a lot of open terrain, and there are some lanes that these panzers can just outflank you. All they're just going to do is they're just going to move through. If they can neutralize or get past your enemy zones of control, they can just charge on in, and you can't let them break your lines. Your lines will get broken at some point, it's almost inevitable, but if you get pushed into pockets, they can just pounce right through. That 6 movement value can get you really far on the board. If you're able to move 6 points, 1, 2, 3, 4, you have to stop at a river. But like, you might then end up, there's a blitzkrieg little token that you have where they can move 1 more time, or they can do an attack. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of flexibility in what these mobile units can do. Now, some of the new stuff we wanted to show you, there are the leaders. Let's see, where did I put them? Well, I think we put them away. Alright, the leaders are right here. Here we go. So the leaders, each side has a leader, and it's dictated by this scenario. So here, Polish front, so we have, this is Rundstedt. He starts in command for the Germans. He has a hand limit of cards. He has an initiative marker limit, and then he's got some little special abilities here. Early blitzkrieg. Only mobile units can't stack with non-mobile. You have to keep your mobile units together so they can charge across Poland. It's effectively what that is. The Polish general, I'm not going to pretend to pronounce his name, a smaller hand limit, a smaller limit of their little initiative markers, and some very interesting constraints on who can stack together and who can counterattack in mobile combat or not. So you end up with these, and there's a chance that they might flip over to their other side and you get a replacement general, which can affect hand limits, and special abilities are going to change as well. So you have those, and the other big new thing is you have these cups, and they have a ton of these initiative markers in it. And this is something that, at least as far as I know, is entirely new to this game. And what you can do is, during the strategic phase, you draw a bunch of these. And remember, this guy gives you a limit of 6. So you can only keep 6 if he's your general. So you draw a certain number based on the turn track. Sometimes you'll draw like 8, but you have to discard down to 6. So you get a little bit of a choice of what you've got. And these are various different counters. And they have little special abilities on them. Some of them have little shock on there. So that gives you a column shift in an attacking combat. This is a surrender, -1 VP. So you can voluntarily leave a city. They surrender. You lose that city, basically, because you have to leave and you can never take it back. But it's -1 victory point for the Germans. So where a city might be worth 2 VPs, it then becomes worth only 1. Or a minor city might be worth only 1 VP, and then it becomes worth no VPs. So there's some really interesting bits and pieces going on there as well. Some of these are like, so you've got ones that say hold. This is a defensive shift for the CRTs as well. And the Germans have one, and these are a little extra action economy, so they just enhance what you can do. But the big part of that is you're spending those as well to activate some of the actions on your cards. So you have a hand of cards. Anytime you see a card that has your faction's symbol in it, so you have this little Polish symbol right here, to get this to trigger, you have to spend one of your very precious tokens, of which you only have 6. So if you have a bunch of these that require those, that's a very expensive hand. Now, some of them don't require them. So here you just kind of play this in the strategic phase and it does whatever it does. But there's this whole extra layer of managing those tiny little markers, playing the cards that you want to play, as well as trying to defend reasonably. Because the movement and combat on the board is very intuitive. You move the number of hexes you can move based on terrain. You fight with odds-based combat. And there's a zone of control around each of your units. That part of it is very, very simple. Supply is easy to trace to your cities, forts, and map edges, things like that. The important part is taking advantage of that in the game, but you have this little extra layer that they added in with those initiative markers and the economy with the cards. It gives you some choices to make. Instead of it just being kind of a straight war game, you got to think, oh, do I sacrifice my little combat bonus to really get this cool event out that might kind of swing an engagement in my favor? So that was a really enjoyable aspect of the game. Combat was nice and easy to learn. You only do a set number of combats, which is, again, something I really liked. Because it, again, gives you very meaningful decisions. The Germans have 5 combats they can do. And the Polish, as well as the French, only have 3. And those really forced you into picking your battles. And sometimes if you're the Germans and you're like, I just need to break through. And some of those combats don't go well, it can be very frustrating. So it is possible for the Polish to like hold out decently if you can get a combat or 2 to swing your way and to make some kind of strategic moves as kind of blocking, make some strategic surrenders, so those minor cities that are worth no VPs, you just kind of leave those. Sad if you think about it from a realistic standpoint, but you're basically saving lives by not fighting in the cities. But there's no victory points to be had because you don't defeat anyone there as the Germans. So really interesting bits and pieces in this game. What we'll do is we'll just wrap up with a few final thoughts.
So that was a look at the board. And just some of the combat mechanics and some of the new bits and pieces there. So this is my second title in the No Retreat series that I've played. I think the same for you.
Yes.
Is there an Italian?
The Italian front.
There's North Africa as well.
Yeah.
I think that's all 4.
Yeah.
That GMT have put out. Because it was originally put out by...
Right, so this game originally was No Retreat 3 from Victory Point Games, and it just focused on the French front.
Right.
Carl wanted to come back. We did a review or an interview with him. I did an interview with him on this game. He wanted to add the
Polish front and then changed some things about the game. So this really represents a deluxeified version of that
Of the old
effort
one.
with some new elements. They also have plan cards that we did not use, but plan cards are like goals. So they added some elements.
And those are for the French one, because the French had secret
Right.
plans.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
But yeah, it was fun. I had
Mm-hmm.
an enjoyable time because I think the topic is a very interesting one. There are very few combat
Mm-hmm.
situations that I like where it's just one-sided. Because this is, to me,
Yeah.
it's one-sided.
It is.
Most of those are incredibly boring to play.
Yeah.
But Poland is always one where I don't know what it is about it. It fascinates me as kind of the first major conflict that sparked World War II.
Yeah.
And just a lot of the tragedy that the civilians went through. And just seeing the hopelessness of what was on. And it was the culmination of all the politics leading up to it. And just seeing it played out and playing a game of it was very interesting to me.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so foregone in its conclusion. But I felt like in this one, I wasn't totally lost as the Polish.
Right.
Although,
I think you did a pretty, all things considered, you did a
Yeah.
pretty good job.
but
You held me off.
I
and-
don't know if the Polish are going to win this one very often.
Yeah, I would struggle to see how they're going to win it often. I liked this game. I liked the system more than I think I did the game.
Okay.
I would, if I'm going to play a no retreat game, I would prefer to play the Russian front.
The Russia front was very good.
I thought it was very good, very clean, very quick. This one just felt a little overly complex. And that's silly coming from us because we play a lot of complex games. This one just felt a little overly complex. I thought some of the elements were good, but I would prefer, in my opinion, to play the Russian front.
That is a very clean game.
Yeah.
And I don't know what to expect from this, honestly.
Right.
Because it had, these are smaller maps, so I imagined it was going to be, like, really simple and approachable. But but it actually had all that extra stuff in it, and I was like, oh, there's actually a few more rules to read. So that was pretty interesting, but I still had an enjoyable time playing this.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand. I think this is a good, solid game. I'm just comparing the games in the system that I've played.
Yeah.
I think I would prefer to play the Russian front. I like the concept and the thought of this. We still want to play the French front as well.
Yeah.
It has its own intricacies. Like you mentioned, the playing cards are for the French front, and I want to experience that, the secret objectives.
Yes.
I think that's a neat concept. But this is a fairly standard hex encounter war game. Low counter density.
Yeah, that's nice. You don't have big stacks of
Right.
stuff that you're fiddling around.
You can only stack 2 units with a support unit on top or a free stacking unit.
Yeah, I like the scale of this game.
Yeah.
I've always liked this kind of a scale. Each counter is like 10,000 or
10,000 to 30 division or core. So it's 10 to 30,000.
So it keeps it low,
Yeah.
but it keeps your decisions really important because you can't really afford to lose that many counters because you're like, oh my gosh, there's a huge hole in my line.
It was extremely expensive to rebuild the units for the Germans. The Polish side got one free, not rebuild, what's it called?
They got a free
Improvement, so you could flip a counter from a reduced side to a reinforcements, basically.
Yeah, and you'd get that for the first few turns because
Right,
it was
and
like
then
they
it's-
were mobilizing their armies still.
Yep. Yeah. So you're right, but that scale, if you lose a counter or two, it's tough.
Yeah.
It is very tough. I lost a Panzer unit and then another infantry unit, but I had a couple others that were flipped, and it was hard to rebuild those or make those more functional. Expensive, I guess.
Yeah, but either way, I had an enjoyable time playing this game. This is an interesting intellectual exercise and a good historical learning exercise as well. Competitively speaking, I don't...
Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But I would like to... it's interesting. I made the comment that I would like to play this again fairly soon, now that we got the system, to see how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, because you would start your units differently,
Yeah.
I think.
Totally would set them up differently. I think you might set your units up differently as well.
I'm not sure how much more
Yeah.
different I do. But I would employ, I think, maybe different tactics of a quicker retreat. I
Right.
think I held on, and
Yeah,
I
you-
lost a couple units
You lost
where I shouldn't
4 or
have.
5 units. Yep.
But very interesting.
Yeah.
So there are good decisions to be made in a game that's, pretty small on the table. So that's nice
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, 1 counter tray, which is great.
Yes.
Very compact game.
And you get basically a whole other game in here as
Yeah.
well, which is nice.
It's 2 games. It's kind of like Revolution Road that has 2 games in it. I know the
Yes.
Battle Hymn from Compass Games has 2 games in it. That's starting to become kind of, I don't want to say standard, but it's like a lot of these games have two battles in them, which is great.
Yes.
It's just a better investment, return on that investment. You have more options.
Especially from a well-renowned system.
Oh,
right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
With no retreat, you kind of know what you're getting. It's
Yeah.
that system, just there's a few extra kind of bits and pieces added on, mechanically speaking. You get the kind of local chrome from whatever situation you're in as well. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. This has been No Retreat, the French and Polish fronts from GMT Games. And I've been Alexander
And I've been Grant.
from theplayersaid.com.